Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, those who bounce in between. It's Comrade Dankey here today with a video about the current dire situation in Bolivia, where you had an indigenous-led people's government, a left-wing government led by President Evo Morales, undergo a military coup where Evo Morales was forced to resign and seek asylum in Mexico. And in the West, we are seeing support for this military dictatorship. We are seeing support for this coup, and it's being called a triumph of democracy. So here's what happened. Alright, so in the first round of elections, Evo was leading with 45.3% of the vote. The second place candidate, Carlos Meza, his right-wing rival, had 38.2% of the vote. So Evo had a pretty big lead. Then overnight, the vote bumped mysteriously in Morales' favor, giving him 47% of the vote, winning the first round of elections for Evo. Now, the OAS is an organization that is pretty much funded by the United States government for the purpose of supporting U.S. interests abroad. It's very similar to the National Endowment of Democracy in that regard. 70% of its funding comes from the United States government. It's right-wing. In terms of the Chilean unrest, which I haven't covered on this channel yet, unfortunately, they actually blamed the Chilean protesters for the violence against them by the police. Of course, we've all seen the video of the police officer snorting coke and then going and beating up protesters. If you haven't, don't worry, I'm going to cover it on my channel in a hot minute. They went full tinfoil hat conspiracy mode, blaming Venezuela's Maduro on the protest. But this is all besides the point. The OAS demands new elections overseen by them. And guess what, folks? Morales says, okay, sure. Let's do it. Let's have a new election overseen by the OAS, free and open to all, so that nobody can talk shit and say that these elections were fraudulent. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? The right wing didn't anticipate that. They panicked. Morales called their bluff. And so they sent in the military. They sent in the dogs and the military 2 hours after Morales called for new elections. Staged a coup. And anybody who says, any dipshit who says that this is not a coup is lying through their teeth to you. David fucking Pacman. Once again, my old rival David Pacman. You know, we are forced once again to come to this goon's channel and deal with his bullshit fucking right-wing peddling of this imperialist Western narrative. And we can see here David completely shilling for the capitalist narrative perpetuated by the Western media.
Really planning to do a segment about this, but there have been so many bad takes coming from, I guess, what we're calling the revolutionary left. That's the non-pejorative term that we've, I guess, agreed on to describe.
All right, so okay, guys. Let's talk about David's use of the term the revolutionary left. Basically, this is David's way of shitting all over anyone who has read theory. If you've read Marx, if you've read Lenin, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, you know, an actual comrade, an actual leftist, if you don't like capitalism, then according to David, you are a revolutionary leftist not worth talking to. David has some tolerance for like anarchists like Noam Chomsky and stuff like that, but he, as in terms of his willingness to support U.S. imperialism in the case of Venezuela, his willingness to support Israeli fascism in the case of Israel Palestine, and his blatant disregard for the truth, as we're about to see in the case of Bolivia, suggests to me that he's basically a CNN panel wannabe. He wants to have his own little show on CNN. He wants to be somewhere on the liberal media. But, he can't get there. And so David Pacman is uncontent, but nevertheless, he's stuck in this rut of pretending to be a progressive, pretending to be a leftist, while shilling out to the most obvious of right-wing military coups.
Describe them about the resignation of Bolivian President Evo Morales that I feel compelled to discuss it because the right is just completely uninformed about Latin American politics. So I really don't have any message for them. But there are a lot of people on the left that are either misunderstanding or just wrong in their conclusions about what has taken place in Bolivia over the last close to 15 years, calling it in completely black and white terms a military coup. So my goal here is to go through the whole story. Hopefully,
A military coup. Like, it's not a military coup. The military coup, demanded that Morales step down. The implication being, if you don't, we're going to charge into the presidential palace and light your ass up. How is it not a military coup? What fucking galaxy are you living in, David Pacman? Holy
this will
shit.
be enlightening. I know I'll be called a shill and all of this stuff, but who cares?
You're a shill, David Pacman. I'm calling you a shill right now. Fuck you.
Right? I mean, we get one shot at doing things the way we actually see them. You only live once, and I'm going to do the stories with the nuance that I think they deserve, because
the nuance of the capitalist-driven New York Times, The Guardian, all these standard media outlets, you're doing nothing but parroting what they say. You're doing nothing but parroting OAS propaganda. Congratulations, David. You're the shilliest of shills. You're the lord of the shills.
That's really what's missing. The problem is there is too much black and white thinking in general in politics. People are either good or bad. The military is either good or bad. Socialism is either good or bad.
Socialism's good. You hear it from me, folks. There are black and white issues in politics, and Bolivia is a black and white issue. If you are on the left and you think that there's some muddied waters with Bolivia, you're either high off your ass or you're not really a leftist. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. David Pacman is a fucking phony leftist.
Politician is either a savior or a villain. And I know lots of people who work in the field of mental health. And they tell me, a lot of the people that come in that I see, they have in their lives all sorts of different things going on that at their root are often caused by black and white thinking about gray areas in life, about jobs, about relationships, about their childhood, whatever. And I believe that the same is happening in politics and specifically with the Bolivia situation. So
well, what a deep insight, David. Now that you're a little centrist, big-brained, I think both sides are wrong, and I'll tell you why it's not all black and it's not all white. It's just totally gray. It's muddy gray. By the way, David, you copied off of Sam Cedar's fucking background thing. I'm not going to let that controversy die.
Let's try to put that aside. Let's just all talk like reasonable people. No one's shilling here. Some people may be missing some of the facts. Some people may be...
Some people like you, David, you're either missing the facts or you're just deliberately ignoring them. So you're either stupid or you're a shill. Either option doesn't look too good for you, my friend.
Coming to conclusions that are tinged by ideology. Let's not make these umbrella black and white declarations. And let's try to actually figure out what's going on. So the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, was first in office in 2006. A few days ago, he resigned at the request or demand of the Bolivian military. And request or demand we can argue about, but it's not actually the most important thing.
It's not actually the most important thing. This is literally the central crux of the issue, David. Evo was prepared for new elections, open elections that would tickle your little liberal balls, and the military stepped in and said, "Nuh-uh, big boy, you need to resign." The implication, of course, being if you don't, we're gonna kill you. So, yeah, David, it's kind of the most important issue. It's kind of the issue of the day, as it were.
Why did this happen? A few days ago, there has been rampant speculation about the most recent election being a bogus election. The Organization of American States put out a report saying,
Once again, like we talked about how the OAS is completely biased and funded by the US government for the explicit purpose of countering communist influence during the Cold War. I mean, it's basically the National Endowment of Democracy.
that the election results were manipulated, including alterations, forced signatures, and wide scale data manipulation. Now, there is already a debate about this. Well, does that mean the election was bogus, or are these just reports of irregularities like you have in many elections, including here in the United States? But for me, the real story is actually bigger than this. And I want to ask you this hypothetical. If Donald Trump, during his second term, imagine he gets reelected in November and he gets a second term.
What?
Imagine that during that second term, Donald Trump changed the Constitution to allow a third term effective immediately, but then also claimed that since the Constitution was changed, his second term is sort of really his first term under the new Constitution, so he should actually get two more. And then during the third term, which is really his fourth, he loses a referendum to allow unlimited terms, and then his Supreme Court justices that he has selected say, forget about the term limits, you can stay as long as you want.
Oh, see, David, you're kind of wrong about the way that, the courts work in Bolivia. The president doesn't appoint who becomes a member of that court. It's decided by the popular vote. So, I mean, you can't really blame Evo Morales for being popular. Like, don't hate him because he's popular, David, because he keeps winning elections. Don't hate Evo Morales because, hell, he wants to get rid of term limits. If the people want to keep electing him until he's fucking 90 years old, well, then let them do it. That's the people's decision, David. It's almost like you're being against democracy because of this arbitrary concept of term limits. Well, what if term limits are the will of the what if getting rid of term limits are the will of the people? What if the people want Evo Morales to be their president for the next like 20 years? Let them do it. Let them vote. After all, he called for new elections to be overseen by the OAS. So if you were, really, really concerned with like Evo Morales taking over the Bolivian political system with no democratic oversights, well then hell, you should be in full support of these new elections. But now you're giggling with glee over this military coup, saying it's not really a military coup, and we all need to throw Evo Morales under the bus and treat these indigenous peoples movements the same. Treat Evo Morales' political movement the exact same as Donald Trump's political movement and say, oh, well, what if Donald Trump wanted to abolish term limits? Well, good luck, Donald Trump, getting elected time and time and time again. Good luck when the American people are just finally sick of you. Once again, like if Donald Trump got rid of the term limits, he would still have to win the elections. If Evo Morales got rid of the term limits, he would still have to win the elections. So it's not really about the term limits, David. It's about the elections. And when it comes down to it, Morales was prepared to have new and open elections overseen by the OAS, and then the military stepped in. So there was a democratic solution to this problem right then and there. But instead of backing that, you instead back this military dictatorship. It's fucking hilarious.
Wouldn't we,
and it's disgusting, David.
Situation, as progressives who are for the rule of law, wouldn't we be begging someone to force Donald Trump out? Okay, now let's talk about what happened in Bolivia. Evo Morales was elected.
That's just such a horrible comparison, a horrible analogy. And David, I think it's intellectually dishonest of you to try to equate the Trump presidency with the Morales presidency. I can cover this in a future video, but we can see how Evo Morales has done great things for the people of Bolivia, for the economy of Bolivia. It's totally not the same.
Elected in 2006. And people were excited because there were good things about his election. It's not black and white. He was the first ethnically indigenous president of Bolivia. That's great in a country that has such a large indigenous population. Why did it take so long to have an indigenous president? Fantastic, lovely. He reduced poverty during his first term. He offered a much more sensible and pragmatic version of the socialism that has been espoused by Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. He invested in infrastructure and development and grew the middle class. Great. But like with many of these Latin American socialists of the last many decades, he's increasingly authoritarian. There's corruption.
Okay,
He was elected to a 5-year term in 2006.
all right. I'm going to call him out on his claims that Evo Morales is authoritarian, and I would call out his claims that Maduro is authoritarian. All right, where are the authoritarians here? What is an authoritarian in David's mind? Someone who stands up against the international oil conglomerates? Somebody who tries to nationalize their country's resources? That's an authoritarian? Somebody who wants to build socialism even in a reformist way? That's an authoritarian to David? I am so sick of seeing this clown's big fucking brain opinions get thrown around in progressive circles like he's actually somebody worth listening to and not just a shill. And that is exactly what David Pacman is, ladies and gentlemen. He is a shill. You listen to him, you might as well be listening to the regurgitated remains of whatever statement the OAS put out. So, in other words, take pretty much everything said by David Pacman with the biggest grain of salt you've ever fucking seen in your whole life, because most likely it's miseducating you about what's really happening in Bolivia. This is not the last video I'm going to make about this topic. Like I mentioned previously, I haven't addressed what's happened in Chile, but I want to end this video showing you these archived tweets from the now interim president, Janine Áñez, who is an idiot and a half. She's a female chud who is essentially, she's very similar. And I'll just say this. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and a lot of the mothers in the church, they didn't have a lot going on. They didn't have jobs. They were housewives, and so they were bored. And so what did they do? Well, they turned on things like the fucking Pat Robertson show and all these fucking daytime preachers, and they got all hyped up on what we call the satanic panic. And so we got to hear how Pokemon was satanic, Harry Potter was satanic, Teletubbies was satanic, literally everything was satanic. Well, this bitch is basically the exact same thing. I mean, she is saying that the indigenous communities are basically Satanists. In this tweet here, she said, "I dream of a Bolivia free of satanic indigenous rights. The city is not free. The city is not for the Indian. They should go to the highlands or the Chaco." So, already extremely racist. Fucking disgusting. This makes me disgusted. Here is a meme about military coup. She said, "The poor Indian clinging to power," she wrote. Yeah, that's tweet has aged like a fine wine because, haha, let's make memes about military coups. That's fucking funny. But of course, this one's my favorite one. Uh, she says the devil must never be worshipped over a photograph of a girl holding the banner which says the children of God do not participate in Halloween. So in the church where I grew up, in this sort of conservative Christian culture, there was a real hatred for Halloween because it was viewed as like the holiday of Satan. And so it's just funny to see the kind of cultural similarities that we have, the Bible Belt here in Tennessee has with these idiots like Janine Añez. Um, so yeah, I will leave you all with that. The situation in Bolivia is dire. The indigenous communities there need to be supported, and internationally, comrades, we need to do our part calling out the Western bullshit lies about Bolivia, defending the indigenous people and the left wing movements associated with them. Fuck David Pacman. Anybody who shills for this military coup, you're a fucking disgrace.